Malik Jefferson knew every crack, every rail, every faded graffiti tag in the old Westbrook rail yard. To most people, it was abandoned property. Rusting tracks, broken freight containers, and a no trespassing sign weathered into illegibility. To Malik and the crew of kids who followed him, it was the only place within biking distance that had enough flat concrete, makeshift ramps, and raw openness to practice tricks without being told to move along. Skateboarding had become his rhythm. The scrape of wheels, the wind in his ears, the feeling of a trick landing after a dozen failures. It was freedom carved out from the limited margins of his neighborhood. That Saturday, with the sun dropping low and the heat still radiating from the pavement, Malik was working on a new sequence, transitioning from a crooked grind into a kickflip out, when the unmistakable rumble of a cruiser's engine sliced the air. Officer Dan Whitaker, a thin, middle-aged patrolman with a neat haircut and a skeptical gaze, rolled up slowly, spotlight cutting through the fading light. Whitaker had been called twice that month about youth loitering in the industrial corridor. He associated the shape of Malik's silhouette with trouble before he even stepped out. "Hey, you kids clear out. This property's private. Trespassing," Whitaker barked, his voice echoing off the concrete. Malik stopped mid-motion, heart dropping, not because he hadn't expected this, but because he knew the script. Move along, get a lecture, maybe a citation, maybe a threat of being banned. He turned, skate underarm, and lifted both hands slightly. "Officer, we're just skating. No one's hurt. We've been here before, just trying to practice." His voice carried the easy cadence of a kid used to smoothing edges. Still, the uniform's presence sharpened it. Whitaker called for identification. Malik gave his name and date of birth. The officer walked the perimeter, then returned with a stern look. "You know you're damaging property. I'm placing you under arrest for trespassing. You're 16, right? You've got options. This isn't one of them." He cuffed Malik in front of the other teenagers, who watched silently, some pulling their hats lower. The cruiser ride to the station was clinical. Malik's wrists tingled from the cuffs, and the officer's questions were perfunctory. The offense was minor, but the phrasing, "You could be out here doing something worse," hung in the air like a threat and a judgment wrapped together. At the station, the intake clerk typed. The glowing screen reflected in Malik's eyes. His mother, Simone, arrived with the battered duffel bag she had brought for weekend visits. She sat across from him in the small visitor room, hands folded tight, breath shallow. "You know better," she said, not yelling but weary. The arrest record would be a blemish. The paperwork would stain future school references, and any attempts to explain why he'd spent hours in the rail yard instead of a gym membership or a youth program that didn't exist. Malik nodded, not defending himself. "They didn't even hear me," he said quietly. "I wasn't hurting anything." The community chatter about the arrest started before the weekend was over. Neighbors muttering about kids causing problems. A local online forum thread inflamed with opinions. And in the middle school hallways, younger skaters repeating the story with that mixture of awe and resignation. The police report went into a folder. The no trespassing sign stayed crooked on its post. Malik's bruised pride was invisible to officials, but to him it was a fresh layer under the skin, being seen as a problem because of skin and presence rather than the actual content of what he was doing. That night, he sat on the stoop outside his grandmother's apartment, board across his knees, replaying the arrest like a loop. His grandmother, Lillian, came out with a thermos of sweet tea and sat beside him. "They put you in a box, baby, 'cause you roll different," she said, not softening. "But what they can't take is what you build with your own hands. That rail yard, it's raw. You ever think of making it yours? Not just borrowing it." Malik stared at the cracked concrete reflected in the streetlight, a slow fire kindling under the old shame and new idea. He didn't know yet what making it yours meant in the system that had stopped him. Just that the place that had criminalized him might become the place that legitimized him. The Monday after the arrest, Malik felt the weight of being watched in new places. The high school hallway felt tighter. Counselors gave him polite nods that didn't meet his eyes. He could hear murmurs. "He's the kid from the rail yard," and "maybe he should stick to something safer." But the murmur that had the most unexpected barbs came from the community meeting board in the town center, where the local council, developers, and a few well-meaning residents met under fluorescent lights to discuss improving the district. Malik, pushed gently by Lillian, showed up not with skateboard tricks, but with a makeshift folder, rough sketches of what a proper skate park could look like, annotated with needs, lighting, drainage, a place for younger kids to learn safety, a modular section for adaptive boards for kids with limited mobility. He wasn't alone. Word had traveled. Jared, a wiry kid from the crew who'd stood outside the station while Malik was processed, brought a GoFundMe printout started by his aunt, a white teacher from across town who had once seen Malik coach her younger cousin in the driveway. Malik's first formal audience was a cold room with a folding table and a panel of city staffers, including Councilwoman Doris Crane, a white woman with a polished speech about redevelopment and a stern skepticism about youth-led initiatives, and Tom Redding, a local developer with manicured hands who saw the rail yard as a potential commercial site, not a playground. Skate parks are magnets for trouble, Crane said, folding her arms. We've had complaints about noise, vandalism, and now you're asking for legit funding after being arrested for trespassing on the same site. Her voice carried that subtle accusation. You broke rules? Why should we legitimize your hobby? Malik didn't flinch. It's not a hobby, he replied. It's community. I can show you the numbers. Kids out here because there's nowhere else to go. If that lot got fixed right, we'd have fewer complaints, less vandalism. I got arrested for being there because of the way I looked, not because I was hurting anybody. Let me help turn the place that got me arrested into the place that keeps kids from getting arrested. Redding leaned back, the developer's instinct calculating. And who's going to pay for this? You? The city already has budget constraints. We could sell that land, build something that brings in revenue. Naomi, a volunteer from the local youth outreach, who had come to support Malik and had a background in community organizing, interjected. What if the investment is in people instead of sale? A park built with local labor, low-cost materials, volunteer maintenance. Give the city credit for revitalization without losing community control. She slid a stack of comparison data. Cost of deferred maintenance. Economic impact of youth disengagement. The positive local traffic a properly programmed park could generate for small businesses. The room shifted a degree. Crane huffed, but the seed was planted. The council table agreed to a conditional pilot study if Malik could gather community support, refine a feasible design, and offer a plan to cover initial cleanup costs. It was a gauntlet. The same system that had criminalized his presence now made him earn the right to be part of the conversation. Lillian suggested he not do it alone, so Malik convened the first skate and build crew. Kids from varied backgrounds, including a white middle schooler named Emily, who had a knack for 3D modeling from her after-school coding camp, and Darnell, a quiet sophomore with a love of carpentry, learned from his uncle. They took the conditional approval like a blueprint. Malik asked for the rail yard's property deeds from the city clerk's office. He wanted to understand who technically owned the space, the liabilities, and the precursors for cleanup requirements. He learned more about drainage issues, local zoning nuances, and the cost of proper skate-friendly concrete versus the cracked, uneven slabs the kids had been using. He refined the design with Emily's help, turning it into a phased plan. Phase 1, cleanup and safe beginner area. Phase 2, advanced obstacles lighting. Phase 3, formal programming and mentorship. Naomi made calls to find a retired urban planner, Gregory Ellis, a white man with a reputation for being prickly but respected, who had once helped design another city park that had stagnated due to bureaucracy. Gregory, intrigued by Malik's persistence and partly shamed by the ironies of seeing youth labeled as risk while institutions failed them, agreed to help as an unpaid advisor. That night, Malik's sketches were pinned on the wall of his grandmother's living room. She traced a finger along the curve of a ramp. You're building more than a park, she said. You're rewriting how they see you. Don't let them make you the problem again. He nodded, exhausted, but the ache in his side, whatever had started after the arrest, was now background noise behind a louder drive. He would spend every spare minute from school, from shifts at the corner store, from family dinners, pushing the project forward. The arrest was no longer just shame. It was a foundation he would repurpose. Malik's grassroots campaign gained velocity in small, deliberate bursts. He started a social media page, Westbrook Skate Park, posting short, raw videos of kids practicing tricks on the dilapidated concrete sprawl. He paired each with captions about what this space could be if it wasn't just a reason to get arrested, tagging city officials and using local community hashtags. Naomi helped him produce a slicker short documentary with phone footage. Kids talking about what skating meant, parents describing how the park would keep their teenagers off street corners, and small business owners explaining how the youth presence had been both a drain and a potential anchor if channeled. The turning point came when Malik organized a public demonstration, Skate for Safe Spaces. Hundreds showed up, some from outside the neighborhood. The event was held in a church parking lot near the rail yard. He assembled a temporary obstacle course from pallets and donated concrete blocks, offering free helmets, bought with small donations, and instruction. The local morning radio host, initially skeptical, came to cover and found himself interviewing a 13-year-old girl from another part of town who had learned to ollie from Malik and now used the sport to cope with anxiety. The day's footage went viral locally. A local blogger, a white millennial who had critiqued activist performative gestures in the past, wrote a piece titled, "The Kid They Arrested Might Build the Place They Should Have Given Him." That viral push forced the city to act with more visible seriousness. A second council meeting was scheduled to review the pilot parameters. This time, Gregory Ellis spoke on Malik's behalf, not as a radical youth advocate, but as a former planner who saw the design logic, the environmental benefits of using reclaimed materials, and the potential long-term savings. He brought along a cost breakdown of a do-nothing scenario versus the phased implementation, showing how the community was already performing unpaid labor in maintaining the neglected lot, while the city paid for increased calls to police due to perceived loitering. Officer Dan Whitaker, the same officer who had arrested Malik, had been watching from the periphery. He attended the demonstration after his partner mentioned the buzz. He didn't come to support the project publicly. His cautious institutional instinct kept him quiet. But he couldn't ignore when a dozen kids, white and black, gathered around Malik, asking him to show them how to pop an ollie safely, his old authority replaced by a sort of reluctant respect. He saw Malik teaching, saw the younger kids, who once might have been his youth loiterers, watching him with admiration, not fear. The cognitive dissonance settled. The kid he arrested wasn't a threat. He was a conduit. Whitaker began showing up quietly, offering logistics advice to the crew on crowd control and safety. A small olive branch that didn't go public, but it was noticed by Naomi and Malik's inner circle. At the council hearing, the opposition was still there. Crane voiced concerns about whether the kids would maintain it, whether the park would attract the wrong crowd, and a new faction, led by a real estate investor with aspirations for condos, tried to argue that the land had more value as private development. Malik took the floor. He didn't come with anger. He came with a binder of testimonials, a video of the girl with anxiety, a petition with thousands of signatures from residents, and a short mosaic of small businesses pledging to sponsor upkeep with micro-donations in exchange for community programming. He spoke about being arrested for trespassing in that very lot, how the stigma had followed him, and how that stigma faded when people saw results instead of assumptions. His voice held both the quiet fierceness of someone who had been dismissed and the human appeal of a peer who wanted to build instead of burn. Crane's committee voted to advance the pilot and to set up a small oversight group that included Malik, Naomi, Gregory, and 2 city staffers. The white investors' plans for condos stalled in the face of neighborhood pushback and the optics of the council shutting down a youth-led revitalization proposal. The first real crack in the narrative that Malik was a problem came from the council itself. They adopted language in their minutes describing the project as community-driven resilience instead of youth initiative. The word shift mattered. Momentum had moved from suspicion to cautious collaboration. The approval came with strings, permits, environmental assessments, liability insurance, and the nearly inevitable tweaking of Malik's juvenile trespassing record. The city's legal department, still wary, demanded that the record remain on file as part of a risk profile, arguing that expungement could set a precedent for unaccountable use of public space. Malik, afraid the black mark would again be used to derail him in the middle of construction, reached out to a local legal aid clinic. There he met Janelle Reed, a young white public interest lawyer who had grown up in a nearby suburb and had seen similar patterns in her own community: youth criminalization without restorative paths. Janelle dug into the police report and district ordinance. She found procedural inconsistencies in how the arrest had been handled, insufficient warnings for first-time youth trespassing, and a failure to offer diversion programs that the city's youth code explicitly required. She proposed a deal. Malik would lead community outreach, mentor younger skaters, and act as an official youth ambassador for the new park. In exchange, the city would file to seal the trespassing charge and formally recognize his role in the project. The law department balked, but under the public visibility already building and with pressure from Naomi and Gregory's quiet lobbying, they agreed to a deferred agreement. Successful completion of the park's Phase 1 and a formal public acknowledgement of his leadership would trigger sealing the record. Meanwhile, not everyone was happy. A small but vocal neighborhood group circulated flyers claiming the skate park would invite outsiders and devalue property. The rhetoric had that coded, nostalgic undertone: keep the kids in their place. Malik organized listening sessions. He went door to door, bringing cookies baked by his grandmother, asking what their real worries were. Many admitted the fear wasn't about skateboards, but about losing control of their changing neighborhood. Some feared crime, others feared their tax dollars being spent on something they didn't understand. Malik listened, addressed security concerns by proposing volunteer patrols, and offered open build days so residents could participate and see the work firsthand. Construction began. The first weekend build day drew a crowd. Volunteers showed up with gloves, donated tools, and a willingness to sweat. Malik stood amid it all, running the logistics, marking out the beginner area, guiding teen crews on how to pour a small patch of concrete correctly, coaxing Emily to adjust her 3D printed templates to create modular rails. Whitaker, still quietly present, set up cones for traffic and helped with safety briefings. Tensions flared when a storm rolled in, rain turning the fresh pours into muddy setbacks. But the crew adapted, using tarps and old theater lights to keep the site workable. Janelle arrived with paperwork, ensuring everything was documented so the deferred agreement stayed on track. The initial section, the Beginner's Plaza, took shape as a mosaic of sweat, laughter, and occasional argument. It wasn't smooth. There were disputes over who got to design the advanced rail, disagreements between older skaters and neighborhood elders about noise mitigation, and a moment where a group of teenage boys from a rival block tried to claim the space with territorial posturing. Malik handled each with a mixture of firmness and empathy. He set clear rules, mediated compromises, designing a quiet hour, installing sound-dampening shrubbery, and brought the rival teens into the build, giving them a stake instead of excluding them. The juxtaposition of the urban planner's quiet approval and the sheriff's deputy driving by and nodding in measured respect became a new daily rhythm. Lillian organized a family-build brunch that combined pancake breakfasts with teach-ins about skate safety, and she used the event to publicly thank the residents who had shown up early, framing it as, "We did this together." Naomi organized a youth leadership council, training 15 kids, some black, some white, some mixed race, to rotate as park stewards, teaching them how to manage conflicts, organize events, and maintain the park. Malik turned his arrest story into a lesson. You get stopped because they don't know what you're building, so you show them. Show them with your actions, not your anger. The park's design incorporated elements from everyone. Recycled rubber edging from the former factory floor provided cushioning. Old telephone poles became bench seating. Solar-powered lights, suggested by Emily's coding club, were mounted for evening safety. A small mural wall painted by local artists featured a large, abstract representation of the community coming together, with a subtle incorporation of a skateboard wheel merging into a city map. As the concrete cured and the first ramps were skated successfully, the officer who had arrested Malik began to show up more openly. He still didn't seek credit, but he'd lift a thumb to kids who used helmets, and he started bringing unused protective gear from the precinct for the youth. His presence signaled a shift, prejudice slowly blunted by witnessing sustained effort and accountability. The once resentful community group began sending emails to the council requesting an official thank you to the park organizers. The narrative flipped from suspicion to cautious pride. The morning of the grand opening was a patchwork of excitement and nerves. Parents, city officials, local businesses, and kids in worn sneakers gathered under a banner that read, not skate park, but Westbrook Community Skate and Play Park. Malik stood at the microphone, his grandmother beside him, with the councilwoman who had initially questioned him now awkwardly clutching a program in her hand. Naomi introduced him. This is a young man who was told to get lost, then told to prove why he mattered. He didn't just build a park, he built the framework for how we see one another, she said. Malik's speech wasn't long. He talked about the day he'd been arrested, about how getting pulled out of practice didn't change his love for skating, but changed how he saw the system. He dedicated the park not to himself, but to any kid who's been told they don't belong in the spaces they love. He announced the creation of the Lillian Jefferson Scholarship Fund for youth to attend design and construction camps, seeded initially with a portion of the small grants the park drew from local businesses. The ribbon was cut with a giant flathead screwdriver, a nod to the DIY ethic, and the first official run was a group of kids doing synchronized ollies that drew a roar. The opening was covered in local media. Headlines ranged from arrest to architect to teens skate park heels division. The developer who'd once wanted condos gave a short speech about the smart investment in human capital and pledged to sponsor a maintenance fund. Councilwoman Crane, a little stiff, admitted on camera that I misjudged the idea's potential. And in a quiet sidebar with Malik, she asked if she could volunteer to help with the parks committee, a gesture that felt like grudging partnership. Officer Whitaker, standing a few yards away, watched as kids of different colors shared the same ramp, laughing when one of them wiped out and got handshakes instead of jeers. He approached Malik, extended a hand, and said quietly, "You were right. This is something else." Malik accepted it. No big performance, just a firm grip. An acknowledgement that land and labels had shifted. Months after the opening, the park had become the quiet epicenter of a transformed neighborhood. Vandalism had dropped. Instead of tagging the abandoned lot, graffiti artists had been commissioned to work on rotating murals. Local teenagers who had once wandered aimlessly now staffed weekend clinics, teaching younger kids skate safety, basic workshops on design, and leadership sessions. The park stewards had a rotation with the local youth police liaison. Whitaker had suggested the idea. He'd learned that respect was built in shared responsibility, not enforcement. Malik had been offered a scholarship to a nearby technical institute's urban design program, partially because he'd turned public skepticism into measurable community impact. Proposal after proposal from other neighborhoods came to the city, asking for versions of the Westbrook model. The council created a formal youth-led public space initiative, with a mandate that at least one youth voice be on any redevelopment committee. Malik mentored younger black skateboarders and also trained them on reading property records, making design sketches, and how to present to a skeptical audience without losing their voice. The developer who had once tried to turn the rail yard into condos now partnered on a pilot mixed-use community hub that included a satellite version of the skate park and affordable workspace for up-and-coming artisans. Councilwoman Crane and Naomi co-chaired a yearly Rebuild Together summit, where they showcased how grassroots design, when treated with respect instead of suspicion, could produce sustainable transformation. The most potent change was in how Malik was referred to in the neighborhood. He had once been the kid they arrested. Now he was the boy who built the park, the community designer, the one who teaches. The initial adversary voices had softened in public, but remained as reminders. There were still meetings where old bureaucratic language tried to edge him out of newer committees, and he had to push with the same urgency as before. But now he had allies. The officer who'd arrested him sat on the park's safety advisory board, quietly ensuring police presence was supportive, not invasive. Janelle's deferred agreement was fulfilled. The trespassing record was sealed, and an official plaque in the park honored restorative leadership. On a quiet evening, Malik sat on the bench beneath the mural, watching a group of kids fill the park with the sound of wheels and laughter. His grandmother came and sat, passing him a bottle of tea. "They tried to box you," she said. "You cut the box up and built a place where everyone could draw outside the lines." Malik nodded, board propped beside him. "Now," he said, "they call it theirs. But we all built it. That's the point." The light dimmed over the concrete, the silhouettes of kids practicing new tricks, tracing the same space that had once been a site of arrest. Now a testament to what happens when a community stops criminalizing presence and starts investing in possibility.